Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching our special program in the lead up to the general elections, India Votes 2019. I'm your host, Frank Razan Pereira. Over the next 1 hour in this special telecast, we will look at some of the economic reforms that were undertaken during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's regime. Several decisions were taken over the last 5 years to boost the economy and keep the growth trajectory going. In our program today, we will do a reality check of the measures taken by the government on the economic front and social sector. Measures like GST, IBC and ease of doing business and more. So the first two economic reforms that we will look at in our program today are the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and GST.
For the Modi government, two game-changing reforms stand out. One is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 to address the problem of non-performing assets. The code allows either the creditor or the borrower to approach the National Company Law Tribunal to initiate insolvency proceedings. It also provides for debt resolution within 3 to 5 months. According to the RBI, the gross non-performing asset ratio has declined from 10.8% in September 2018 to 10.3% in March 2019 and is estimated to go down to 10.2% in September 2019. The second major reform by the NDA government came in the form of the biggest tax reform in Indian history. The Goods and Services Tax or the GST, which took over a decade to formulate. GST that aimed to simplify the tax structure of the country by replacing the erstwhile multi-layered complicated tax system was introduced in 2017. The GST eliminated the maze of checkposts at state borders. It has resulted in a higher ease of doing business in the economy. A third reform credited to the Modi government is the deregulation of diesel and petroleum prices. This had the effect of substantially slashing the subsidy bill. India also joined a select club of nations like the US and Australia, where fuel prices are revised on a daily basis. One of the first acts of the Modi government after assuming power was to dismantle the Planning Commission. Experts say the measure eliminated the distinction between planned and non-planned expenditure in annual budgets. State governments were freed from rigid national schemes and allowed them more discretion on using their funds. The government also accepted a Finance Commission proposal to give state governments 42% of central tax receipts, up from 32%. Continuing with its policy of giving the private sector more play, the government lifted the cap on foreign investment in the defense sector from 26% to 49%. In the insurance sector, the cap for foreign investment was raised to 49%. Combating corruption has been a key focus of the Modi government. In addition to getting a law passed against fugitive economic offenders, the government actively targeted prominent figures accused of corruption. It also achieved major success in ending data secrecy of money stashed in Swiss banks that has for long been seen as a haven for illicit wealth.
Let's now listen to what experts have to say.
The biggest issue is that managing the economy decently enough is the biggest achievement. Second is, when you say big economic decisions, obviously whether you like it or not, both the GST and demonetization will top the list. But to a journalist like me, the issue will be more of people-friendly measures. Like say for example, he had rolled out pension for the unorganized sector. This is a big issue. Second, the latest budget has come up with a 6,000 rupees per year as compensation for farmers to support their income and increase their, the liquidity issue that they are facing. Third, the point here is that you have a healthcare program which is supposed to be the largest in the world, Ayushman Bharat. I may or may not agree with the tenets of Ayushman Bharat. But the point is, you have insurance cover, you have credible health services at your doorstep, and third, they are affordable and cashless.
So joining me on the program now to talk about some of these decisions that were taken and of course what was done as far as the economy is concerned, I have with me on the program Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, consulting editor of the Business Standard, Deepshika Sikarwar, senior editor, The Economic Times, and Smita Mishra, senior journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this special telecast. Deepshika, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's talk about the IBC and what are the circumstances that led to bringing about the IBC.
So if we actually go to 2014 when the government took charge, the whole banking system was in kind of a logjam. The balance sheet were under a lot of stress because there were huge NPAs. Obviously, companies' performances had deteriorated and they were unable to pay loans. Some of these loans were genuine, not paid on for genuine reasons because of economic circumstances. Some of them, of course, were, there was a lot of over-leveraging and companies' balance sheet did not support that kind of debt. And there were other issues related to, how these loans were extended to these companies. So IBC actually came as a very powerful tool in the hands of banks, which were unable to get these companies to pay up these loans. So IBC has, served two-pronged purposes. One is, it has led to improvement in the credit culture, and it will go very far in, improving the credit culture. And secondly, now the promoters which were not really paying, though they had the propensity to pay up these loans or had siphoned off money from the company's balance sheets, they are now willing to pay up to actually save their companies from getting sold off or go into resolution. So this has really worked in two ways in a very effective manner.
Right. Smita, as far as IBC is concerned, how would you look at the IBC and how has it really helped the economy?
No, of course it has, because you see, we have more and more people coming into the banking sector now. Of course, it was hugely because of the Jan Dhan revolutionary move that the Prime Minister decided to introduce right after taking charge. But then I'm also talking generally. This is not just about the Jan Dhan Yojana. My point is, as more and more people come into salaried jobs and their incomes increase, they start trusting the banks and they come into the banking network. In such a situation, what a country, a democracy seriously needs is for the people to have trust in the banks, okay? But ironically, you have a situation where instead of trusting the banking system, we were going into the situation the banks would have started to sink if somebody did not help them. And this NPA situation was becoming completely unsustainable. And therefore, you see, whenever there is a government in place, it will and there is a crisis situation, any government will find a way to tide over the crisis. But usually what happens is our response to serious crisis is a very piecemeal kind of an approach. What we do is we find a way out of the situation which will tide you for the time being, and there is no guarantee that the situation will not recur. What Mr. Modi and the finance minister has been trying to do since day one is to find long-term sustainable solutions to problems of the economy, and therefore they have devised reforms which will not only tide you over a crisis, they will help you to reach, to organize a system where such a situation must not recur. And I see the IBC move, the legislation, as part of that effort. And of course, if you just look around you in a general conversation, you will find that those headlines about NPAs are now not so much there. Shubhamoy ji is in a better position to, correct me if I am wrong. But you see, we are now on track. We are now on track. Situation is getting solved. And hopefully, this one of those reforms which has created trust in the system, and the banks needed help, frankly. They were trapped in a situation. They needed somebody to help them to come out of it. They were by themselves unable to, get back their money.
Right. Shubhamoy, how would you look at the banking sector reforms? What has really worked? What hasn't worked? What more needs to be done?
The terminal problem has worked in the sense that we have got a finito on the loans. That loans which do not work basically come to the plate of the IBC for liquidation, bankruptcy, resolution. What has not worked is the fundamental problem of managing the banks. We are still a long way from that. There was a promising beginning, which was the Bank Boards Bureau, and the idea was governance change. That was a very important thing to have done. That how are bank boards manned? Who are the people who will be sitting in the boards and say that this loan should go through, this loan shouldn't go through? Where are the risks coming along? Unfortunately, that has still not really gone through. I take on board the government's point that yes, directions from North Block may not be there anymore. But that is just one part of it. The point is that over the decades, the Indian banks, and especially the public sector banks, have grown accustomed to the idea that they will be guided on where to give the loans. Very few banks, other than the top 3 in the public sector, have the wherewithal to be able to analyze how to give a big loan. The loans are now very big sized that come along. Do the banks have the ability to understand, to parse through those papers, to really take a considered decision? They don't, accepting. And so therefore, the problem of managing the banks in terms of putting in people at the top who can actually take the banks along on where they need to go. For instance, even if supposing a bank needs to be merged, 2 banks come together, but if both the leaders of those banks are faceless, then it doesn't really create much of a synergy. It's just 2 teams coming together without a captain. So those problems still remain. IBC is a different thing altogether. It has actually said that those which the banks cannot handle by themselves get out of that system, and there's a different track altogether, which is remarkable. So, basically it again proves that the Indian government, which I take a point from what Smita was saying, and Deepshika was also saying, that the Indian government works best when there's a crisis. The crisis that came along in 2014, it was been building up and came to a position which was sort of, breaking the back of the banking system. The India government typically again came along with a long-term solution. That is working, and the numbers are already looking impressive. In fact, the average resolution time of those loans is about 230 days. Leave out the few marquee names, the big ones. Others are, the average is around 230, which I saw from the IBC data. But what happens to the day-to-day managing of what the banks do? Have they gone up the thing?
Right. Let's move on now from the banking sector to the GST. Deepshika, as far as the GST is concerned, another landmark reform really that we've seen in the last few years. It was a reform that was in the making for several years, but finally we've seen it go through.
Finally, it happened, yes. Nobody actually would believe, and I, having covered taxation for many years, we'd heard a lot of talk around, GST, and finally when we actually saw it was difficult to believe that, okay, finally we are rolling out this reform. Now, India, since the beginning, you've had multiple taxes. States have multiple taxes. Central itself had taxes, it had cesses, and the industry was bearing the brunt of all these. It was not just about paying taxes, it was also about compliances. As many taxes means as many compliances. So when GST happened, GST means, you have one single tax, you will have limited compliance. Of course, GST can be improved further, but in terms of compliances for companies, it's a huge, huge improvement. You have one single compliance at central and state level. So for companies, it means that much of reduced work. that much of reduced, putting in people to ensure those compliances, it also means ease of doing business. So GST per se has done a lot of cleanup, not just for businesses. If you look at from consumers' point of view, as a consumer, I now know what is the tax that I'm paying on each commodity.
Right.
Earlier, you would not know what is the actual tax that you're paying because excise duty was embedded in it. Then there was tax on tax. So GST has been like a boon for not just the industry, as also for the consumers as a whole.
Right. Smita, could it have been simpler to start off with, do you believe, rather than learn as you go, or that was the best method?
Well, everything and anything can always be improved. It's a work in progress. And GST more so is a work in progress than anything else, for the simple reason that I don't think any country in the world has gone for such a massive tax reform in one go. As Deepshika was saying, just the fact that the GST has finally taken off itself, I would think, is a great job done, number one. Coming to the complications related to the GST process, let's look at it the other way. I mean, think of a certain product that you were buying before the GST era. It was completely baffling. We didn't know what are the taxes. There were so many multiple taxes that we were paying, and very naively we would just pay the shopkeeper whatever was asked of us. And we didn't even know if the tax was actually going to the right place, because there were so many other kacha pakka issues involved there. So therefore, number one, the fact that everything is now in the structured format. There is very little one can siphon off, not at all actually. And if you think of, because you were asking me about the complications, I would tell you that yes, right when GST was implemented, there was some fears and complications and complaints about the process and the formalities involved. But lately, I should say about a year or less than a year, my conversation in general with traders, and they are usually small traders, all right, they are not very big companies. They just employ a few people in their establishment, or not even that sometimes. I realize that the things are on track. Things are on track. They are finding it, they are able to understand the formalities well. A lot of them are not so dependent on their financial advisors and CAs anymore.
Right.
They say we are able to handle it on our own. All right. So that is one thing. The second thing is from the consumer's point of view. It's become so simple. All goods and products which relate to your day-to-day living are, they are almost in the 5% bracket. There are just very little few services and things that I think go into the higher bracket. And of course, those few items which the finance minister likes to call sin goods, so that's it.
Right.
But if you look at your own domestic budget at home, you will find that most of the things that we are now paying comes into the 5% bracket, and a lot of them are actually not taxed at all.
Right.
Right. So I think from those initial teething days of having some complication, which I think was, it was there in substance, but more of it was in the mind. It was more of a mental block, when you change over into a system very quickly.
Sure.
And I think we are now gradually on track. And I believe in another 1 year, nobody will remember the troubles related to GST.
Right. Shubhamay, initial teething troubles as far as the GST is concerned, but is this the final shape that we've seen now? And do you believe that there is some kind of improvement that is required?
GST is a work in progress. I mean, as both Smita and Deepshika have pointed out very well, that this is something that started off. There are certain things, and it'll continue the refinements. The biggest positive, what I might call checkbox for GST is any country which has introduced GST, the next year has been a year of rapid inflation. India has bucked the trend, and that's a very huge demonstrator of the fact that GST has actually helped the economy. It was quite given, absolutely assured that there would be a rise in inflation. I mean, I can't think of any analyst report which came along which said that there will not be an inflation. There was no inflation. Inflation actually started, almost coincided with the decline in GST. So that I think is something that's fundamentally impressive, despite the problem of the fact that there have been more than one tax rate. What has happened is GST has led to formalization of the economy, and this is where there's a bit of a conundrum. None of us actually knew, and we have to admit that we didn't know this. The informal sector, a large part of their what I might call margin actually was the fact that they were not paying taxes. This tax is now getting soaked in. So within the informal sector, the margin that was there between the which was actually not a profit margin, it was simply the fact that the tax wasn't there, it has now got drained out.
Right.
And that is where you find the problems or the articulation that GST is causing trouble. And this is something that, frankly speaking, we had no idea. Nobody had an idea that this is something that is so substantially will have an impact. So it's not a question of rates. No matter whatever rates you put on, it is simply the fact that if there's going to be a taxation, that taxation is going to soak up that margin. So that is something that is inevitable. As Smita is saying, that it'll over time we'll have to get used to a new way of doing business for the informal sector. Remember, it's not for the formal sector. The formal sector, as it is, was fairly prepared, and they knew what was coming, and they were prepared, and they simply and rather they're happy with the fact that the tax structure has got more streamlined, the costs have come down. But for the informal sector, it's a huge recalibration of the entire way of doing business, and to the extent that it's a sizable part of the Indian economy, that has actually been, all the words disruption that you hear about is essentially stems from that.
Right.
If I can just add to what Shubhmoy said, the fact that inflation was kept in check was because there were multiple rates. India did not opt for a single rate, which was done by many other countries, and precisely the reason why we wanted to keep prices in check. Multiple rates have their own complications, and as finance ministers already indicated that we would be eventually moving towards a single rate structure, but we've just rolled out GST, so the tax structure has to mature. And one thing commendable, which you need to commend this government, is that as and when people came up with issues, government was very responsive. Multiple changes were carried out in procedures, in the structure itself, to address concerns of all stakeholders.
Right. All right. We'll slip into a short break now. On the other side, we'll talk about social sector. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
What In Depth with me, Tina Jha, at 6 p.m.
Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I'm Vishal Dahiya, and this week we will talk about the assault rifle AK-203.
The AK-203 is the latest model. It's being inducted into Russian army also simultaneously. So it's actually a design of the future.
When it comes to counterinsurgency and whatever we have discussed, I think this is a very fantastic choice. It also comes cheaper.
We are looking at a kill, and I think this weapon with 7.62 caliber is going to achieve that kill.
हर वो आर्थिक फैसला या नीति जो तय करता है विकास की गति, कैसे और क्यों लिए जाते हैं फैसले, क्या होता है इनका हम पर असर। देखिए अर्थनीति शनिवार शाम 7:30 बजे सिर्फ राज्यसभा टीवी पर।
Tales that inspire. Stories of social change. A salute to diversity. Promoting public discourse. Events that motivate. Inspiring the innovative spirit. Watch Rajya Sabha television documentaries.
Welcome back. You're watching India Votes on Rajya Sabha television with me, Frank Pereira. Well, let's now shift our focus to the social front, where several measures were taken in this sector as well. The two things that stand out the most are the Swachh Bharat mission and Ayushman Bharat. Let's take a look.
The Modi government has done phenomenal work in the social sector too, starting with its flagship scheme, the Swachh Bharat mission that was launched on October 2, 2014. Accelerating the coverage of universal sanitation in the country, the mission aimed to clean up streets, roads and infrastructure of cities, small towns and rural areas. It also aimed at achieving an open defecation-free India. 9,23,33,109 household toilets have been built since the scheme was launched. The phenomenal growth can be seen from the fact that before 2014, the number was just 48,95,941. Open defecation-free villages increased from 47,026 to 5,54,745 villages. 613 districts in 29 states and union territories have been declared open defecation-free. After cleanliness, the government turned its focus towards a healthy India. The world's largest government-funded healthcare scheme, the Ayushman Bharat or the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, was launched in September 2018. It provides health protection to over 10.74 crore poor families in both rural and urban areas. It provides a benefit cover of 5 lakh rupees per family annually, and over 50 crore people are expected to benefit in all. Since its launch in September 2018, over 13 lakh people have been treated. Over 2 crore 8 lakh 19,359 PMJAY health e-cards have also been issued. Another flagship scheme, Make in India, has also brought about a surge in entrepreneurship. The government's push to domestic mobile phone manufacturing has made India a mobile phone manufacturing powerhouse. By November 2018, 268 mobile handset and component plants had been set up in India since the launch of the Make in India scheme. 6.7 lakh jobs were created in these plants. Development of rural India has been another focus area. Last mile connectivity to all villages and to fulfill the dream of a digital India. One lakh 24,315 gram panchayats have been connected by optical fiber. The government aims to connect every village with high-speed internet in this year under the BharatNet program. The BharatNet program, or the National Optical Fiber Network, aims to facilitate the delivery of e-governance, e-health, e-education, e-banking and other services to every citizen. With grassroots transformation, inclusion of rural India, a new India is on the road to a fast growth.
We also spoke to some other experts on how India has fared in the social sector under the Modi government. Let's listen.
We hardly see any corruption at the higher level. Lower level it is there, no denying, but higher level if it is not there, then the things work very well. All the schemes are implemented. There is a question about the speed with which they are being implemented, but at the same time it will take little extra time, but they will be implemented well. And all the schemes are made by putting the last person in the line in mind. When you look after their interest, then you cannot go wrong. But if you are looking for the interest of very few people or people on the top only, those schemes are in fact not good and they don't make any difference in the life of people. His thought process is such that he thinks about the last person in the line and he is able to achieve what he wants because then the scheme is made keeping that in mind. So it works very well.
All right, continuing our discussion here in the studio with my panelists right now. Shubhamoy, as far as cleanliness is concerned, the government took up that particular issue on a war footing. Several measures were taken really as far as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is concerned. And how would you look back at that?
Yeah, we were just now discussing GST and IBC. The central government in India has a limited ability traditionally. And these schemes, the ones in the taxation structure, banking, are easier for the central government to handle. Successive governments had actually had major problems handling social sector schemes, and that too on rollout at the scale and numbers which you were just showing. And frankly speaking, it has been a big challenge. And the fact that it has even gone this far and the numbers are actually showing impressive, obviously there will be large gaps between places where things have been created, utilization. But still, the fact that it has actually managed to reach that far is, I think, a not just significant, it's a very significant achievement. Also the fact, you remember that for many of these schemes, it is the state governments which have to pitch in. Like for instance, to give an example, a bankruptcy, you essentially set up a panel with a set of people, bring in companies, that's it. It's a very controlled environment. A Swachhata Abhiyan or an Ayushman Bharat, there is a huge amount of involvement of the states that's involved. The people respond to the schemes through the state governments, and to make all of them come together is, I think, something which actually the scale of that achievement is not often understood in terms of how much of coordination it has required at the level between, at the three levels, between the center, the states, and then to the people. And I think that is something which is actually laying the groundwork for several other delivery mechanisms. We've often failed, we've often said, Mr. Jindal was talking about the fact that, last mile people don't get it. The reason why they don't get it is because the ability to get all the three together and to deliver at a level which actually reaches those many millions is a phenomenally difficult task, where the ticket size for each person is very low. One toilet in one village, in one house, to be directed from the level of a central government office in Shastri Bhavan going all the way down to a village somewhere is a phenomenally complicated exercise. Successive groups of planners over the years have found that and have wrestled with this challenge of not being able to reach. And the fact that it's reached in that proportion, in that scale, is I think actually a confidence booster of a much more significant, I'm using the word significant quite a few times, but it's actually a confidence booster that has not been tried earlier on. And I think this gives us hope that, things like health sector, larger health, education, skilling, those things which are actually major challenges for India can be tackled in the same platform, in the same structure in which has been created. So right. I think that was a major takeaway from these programs.
Right. Shubhamoy, I know you have to be elsewhere. Thank you for joining us on the program and sharing your views on several of the issues that we've spoken here over the last half an hour or so. Let me continue my discussion now. Smita, talking about the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, what is it that stands out the most for you?
No, several things actually. Most importantly, to think that a government, we have all been knowing that open defecation has been a huge challenge in our country, our society, for our women, our children, everyone. And it is not only limited to rural areas like many of us would like to think, It's actually small towns, semi-urban areas, and even big towns. There are large areas, shanties, and such places, slums, where even in the big bang cities of the country, open defecation has been a huge challenge. I don't know why successive governments have been wanting to look over it. If you just close your eyes, the challenge does not disappear. It just gets multiplied so many times. And that is exactly what happened in our country. Had we taken head on this problem of open defecation, lack of toilets in our country, right in the beginning, we would not have been at this position that we were. So yes, full marks to the government for coming out frankly, openly, unreservedly to take on the challenge and telling the people that, look, not having a toilet in your home, in your household is not something to be ashamed of. please come out. The government is ready to hold your hand. So come out and avail of the program. I think, and this is what experts have been writing, all international agencies have recognized the massive success of Swachh Bharat mission, both urban and rural. And they have said, you see, the biggest long-term benefit of launching Swachh Bharat has been that it has become a habit-changing thing. You know, it's not just about providing toilets. It is to convince the people that it is for your own good. It is for your own health, hygiene. In case of women, it is also about dignity. It's also about crime. If you look at the crime pages, city pages of various editions, particularly newspaper editions in Mufassil areas, you will find more than 50% of crimes attempted on our women and girls happen because they do not have the facility to relieve themselves at home. They have to go out in the dark. Okay? So there are various aspects that have changed the lives of people because of Swachh Bharat mission. First of all, hygiene, definitely. So that translates into good health, lack of infection. Then it's about dignity, it's about respect, and it's also in general about saving time. I know we usually tend to interact with people who are not compelled to go out to relieve themselves. But I have spent my time in villages and I know that there are only certain hours when the women, especially the women, I mean it applies to men also, but the women face the worst of it. There are only certain hours in the evening and very early in the dawn time when the women can go out to relieve themselves. Now, is this healthy? Isn't this really a torture? Shouldn't that woman in the village or the girl have the facility to relieve herself as and when nature calls? I mean, can you imagine that we have been living in this for decades? Number one. Number two, so therefore it also saves times. No woman in the dark dares to go out for toilet alone. So, you know, she will wait for members in the family to accompany her, other females in the family to accompany her. So, for that certain period of time, the women in the family will be out there in the field. It's also about saving time. Right. It's about allowing them quality time to attend to other responsibilities. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't think the scope of this program is enough for us to discuss in how many ways Swachh Bharat mission, availability of toilets, has led to, changing the life of our society. And in another way, I also look at Swachh Bharat mission in the urban class for people like us who had the facility of toilets at home. But please think about this. It is not only about providing toilets to people who did not have access to toilets. It's also about Swachh Bharat mission is also pushing in a big way to build toilets and facilities in urban areas, markets and, chalks and the market areas and public places, which also was a great handicap in our public life. For example, you are equipped enough to have a toilet at home, but you are spending 8 or 9 hours working outside. And even the big cities did not have public toilets. Think about the women who are out on the streets for their work or for any other reason. So Swachh Bharat is a complete paradigm shift in terms of health and hygiene in the country. I hope whichever government comes to power will not cut the funds, will promote it and help it and fund it as much as possible. Right. Nothing is more important in the society at the moment than the Swachh Bharat mission. Sure. And therefore the whole world has been recognizing, to think that we did do it earlier itself is baffling. Right.
Deepshika, that having been said, what are the challenges really as far as the mission is concerned, and what more needs to be done, do you think, going forward?
You know, if I can just add to what Smita said, we have to see it, whenever people are traveling abroad, the first thing that strikes most, and whenever they come back with their stories, is, oh, how clean was the place, most of the places. And, when Prime Minister Modi announced Swachh Bharat mission, a lot of his critiques, said, why should a Prime Minister get, involved with something as cleanliness? It was considered a very small thing to get Prime Minister's attention. But his involvement actually ensured that it becomes a sort of movement. Now, Swachh Bharat is recognized in smaller cities, small towns. Indore has emerged as, a cleanest city. From consecutive 3 years, it's bagging the award. And you see the garbage disposal system, which is apparently quite efficient there. There is segregation of waste. So, cities, their municipal bodies are adopting this mission, which will ensure, and coming to the question that you asked, going forward, how does it work? The success of this mission would be when it gets adopted by these local bodies and they implement it with the same fervor that it has been implemented at the central level, at the national level. So if Indore is doing it, I'm sure when this kind of a competition is there, there would be other cities which will come forward and want to emulate the example of, say, Indore. That is obviously, that will help the mission succeed going forward.
Right. Before I slip into a break and we continue our discussion on other aspects, Smita, a word on Ayushman Bharat and how that too has been a game changer.
Yes, of course. This is what happens, and I think it's part of life. It's not just about governance. Even at home, when somebody begins something really revolutionary, we all tend to think, oh, this was so important, so why didn't we do it before? So I think it applies to Swachh Bharat mission, and even now Ayushman Bharat, the Prime Minister, PMJ. I think now that we see that yes, it is actually possible for the government to ensure healthcare services, health insurance to every poor member of the poor citizen of the country. And yes, there are ways to work it out. Till now, now that Ayushman Bharat has been, implemented and it's taken off like anything, and we now tend to think, why didn't somebody do it earlier? So that's it. I think it's just too bold. Ayushman Bharat is just so bold for the simple reason that we are not Israel or any such a country, which has something like a few million people. So anything which is decided at the policy level and it gets bang on implemented, and it's smooth sailing after that. No, India has 125 crore people. So to think of a health insurance facility, a health insurance benefit, which should be applicable, which should be availed by all the poor people, it's not only about organizing the money, it's also about ensuring the network to implement that plan. Right. For example, if there is a small child in the family who is by dint of the scheme eligible to avail of Ayushman Bharat, but at that particular time when the child really needs health care, they actually do not have the hospital which can cure the child. So in that situation, Ayushman Bharat is not really helpful for that parent. Okay? So when you push Ayushman Bharat, you are not only giving health care, health insurance to your citizens, which is one of their basic requirements. Healthcare is one of our basic requirements, right, like food, shelter. So at that point of time, this is when the second stage kicks in. Okay? The first is to, enroll the beneficiaries, make their cards and those things, so that they become eligible to avail of the scheme. But the second most important part is once they have the card, so what? I mean, will they be cured of the disease? To that extent, you come to the second stage. That is ensuring good standard healthcare facilities in the deepest interiors of the country. So you see, like the Swachh Bharat mission, this is one thing leading to another. Everybody in the country knows that India's public healthcare system has been in shambles. Right. Nobody, if he or she can afford it, likes to go to a government hospital. Okay? So this way we are not only empowering the citizens or benefiting them from healthcare, we are also now moving into the stage when the public sector healthcare will become good enough and professional enough with the right kind of professionals, the right kind of staff, doctors, facilities, and therefore, and I'm beginning to see the change. It's a little too early to reach down to the village, but the beneficiaries are coming out and they have good things to say about the scheme.
Sure. All right. We'll slip into our second break on the program now, but on the other side, we'll talk about the growth trajectory, GDP growth that India has seen over the last 5 years, and also a few other measures taken by the government to ensure that that growth trajectory was on an upward trajectory. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
देखिए देश देशांतर मेरे साथ रात 8:30 बजे सिर्फ राज्यसभा टीवी पर।
The Nehru Trophy boat race of Kerala, popularly called Vallam Kali in local parlance. This historic boat race dates back to 1952 when Pandit Nehru visited the state and a pageantry of boats accompanied him from Kottayam to Alappuzha. The race, conducted on the second Saturday of August every year, is a major tourist attraction. It's generally the snake boats which participate in the race, and hence the shape of the winner's trophy is also a replica of a snake boat.
Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha television. Well, steps were taken to keep the growth trajectory going as well. Measures were in particular taken to deal with banking woes. India's ranking in ease of doing business to improve manifold under the present government.
India recorded a GDP growth of 7.3% on an average for the last 4 years under the Modi government, compared to UPA era's 6.7%. This is the highest across all governments since liberalization.
अटल जी की सरकार ने वर्ष 2004 में यूपीए को 8% विकास दर वाली अर्थव्यवस्था सौंपी थी। जब अटल जी गए तब 8% ग्रोथ के साथ सुपुर्द करके गए थे, लेकिन वर्ष 2013-14 में जब यूपीए की विदाई हो रही थी तब विकास दर 5% करीब पहुंच गई थी। 2014 में एक बार फिर हमने इस चुनौती को स्वीकार किया। आज एक बार फिर जीडीपी ग्रोथ रेट को हमारी सरकार ने 7 से 8% के बीच पहुंचा दिया है।
Economic growth is likely to accelerate to 7.5% in 2019-20 from 7.2% projected for the current fiscal. In its later monetary policy review, the RBI also projected a growth rate of 7.4% for the next fiscal. The International Monetary Fund's recent World Economy Outlook update foresees India growing at 7.5% in 2019. India will continue to be the fastest growing major economy in the next decade as well. Globally, India surpassed France to become the world's 6th largest economy last year. By the end of this year, we are expected to overtake the UK to take the 5th position on way to becoming a $3 trillion economy in 2020. Since the year 2000, India's share in the global economy has doubled from 1.5% to 3.2%. The country's per capita income is now nearing $2,000, twice the level 10 years ago.
आज हम सबसे तेज गति से बढ़ने वाली बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था है। 1991, आप चौंक जाएंगे। 1991 से देखें तो पिछले 5 साल की अवधि में हमने जीडीपी ग्रोथ सबसे तेज गति से बढ़ाई है। 1991 से 1991 से देखें तो पिछले 5 साल की अवधि में हमने सबसे तेज महंगाई दर को घटाया है। आज देश में सबसे तेज गति से सड़कों का निर्माण हो रहा है। आज सबसे तेज गति से रेलवे का विकास कार्य हो रहा है। आज हम सबसे तेज गति से गरीबों के लिए मकान बना रहे हैं।
India has also jumped 23 places to the 77th position in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings. The country has made a leap of 50 places in just 2 years, emerging as one of the top reformers. The Modi government has aimed to enter the top 50 bracket, a tough goal, but one that seems within India's reach. India was ranked at the 142nd position among 190 nations when this government came to power in 2014. Then it ranked 131st in 2016 before hitting the 100th rank in 2017. It is currently ranked 77 with improvements in 6 of the 10 parameters relating to starting and doing business in a country. India could improve its ranking further given that the impact of some of the ongoing reforms has not been fully realized yet.
Well, let's now listen in to some experts.
Starting from Make in India to increase the manufacturing growth trajectory, to increase manufacturing share in the GDP. And after the Make in India program, there are a lot of reforms to boost up the economic growth, like economic reforms started from ease of doing business. We have improved a lot from 142 in 2014 to 77 in the recent year, 2018-2019. So now in the global ecosystem, our economic parameters are looking very bright. We have improved a lot in the global competitiveness index. We have improved a lot in the global innovation index, global retail index, and the logistics performance index. So almost all the parameters are in favor of India's economy. And if we consider the major economic lead indicators, like we have improved in the inflation, we are number 1 in the GDP growth rate, and we have improved a lot in the debt to GDP ratio. We have improved a lot in the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, and we have improved a lot in the export trajectory also. Though export growth is still volatile, but our growth is better than many economies in the world economic system.
Well, let's now talk about India's growth over the last 5 years. Deepshika, your thoughts on our growth story?
You know, when the government took over in 2014, if we look at the circumstances prevailing then, the country was seen as a member of the Fragile Five club. It was, you know, the talk was there was a policy paralysis in the country. Private investment was not taking off. The macroeconomic scenario wasn't very good. You had high fiscal deficit, you had high interest rates, you had very high inflation. So the investment climate per se was not very conducive for investors. So the government's first task was, which it took upon itself, was to make it attractive for investors. Now, investors look at long-term stability in the macroeconomic climate, and that is the first and the foremost thing which was addressed and taken upon. So in the 5 years, if you see, government's performance on macroeconomic parameters has been very good. Inflation has been near low. Interest rates have not been that high. They have tried to sort of provide a scenario for the RBI to maintain stable interest rates. Current account deficit has been kept under check. Besides keeping the macroeconomic parameters, a number of measures were initiated to ensure that the investment flows in. So a number of programs, number of schemes were launched, and policy measures were taken up so that a climate is created for investors to come and invest in the country, not just for the domestic investors, but also for the foreign investors. So you had a huge push for Make in India to ensure, because manufacturing had suffered a great deal. So the push was to boost manufacturing in the country.
Right.
There was a push to boost entrepreneurship in the country. So you had programs like Stand Up India, Startup India, for youngsters who want to set up their own ventures. A scheme for financing in shape of Mudra was launched to ensure that, small, very small entrepreneurs, small scale vendors, if they need any financial assistance, they can seek under that.
I've got limited time on the
Sure,
program.
I'll just wind up, yeah. And then there was a lot of focus on ease of doing business to ensure that the overall framework for businesses becomes much more easier, lesser compliance, to ensure that, you know, they can carry out business with ease, not bother about compliances per se. So all these measures had their impact, you know, the macroeconomic climate, stable macro economy, and plus these measures to boost investment and growth.
All right. Smita, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark. I've got very limited time, so 30 seconds.
Deepshika has already outlined, you know, that we were members of the Fragile Five. And, you know, we've really kind of had huge disruptions in these 4.5 years. We had the biggest demonetization announcement of the world ever, you know, of weeding out high currency, high value currency. Then immediately after we came out of the demo period, we shifted to a new tax regime.
Right.
Now that's another huge disruption. See, please look at it this way. Despite all these massive disruptions, we have not only kept our estimates on track, we are now one of the fastest growing economies of the world. We have taken on the massive giants of economy at the global level. But very briefly, I would not have been very happy with the GDP figures just per se. I am happy about the fact that we have now a delivery mechanism where social benefits are reaching the beneficiaries without any middlemen.
Right.
I am happy about the fact that the largest number of beneficiaries in Mudra is women. I am happy about the fact that the money that, you know, the huge tax net that increased owing to GDP, that money can now be gainfully spent in reaching social welfare schemes to our women, our poor people. So I look at it in a more holistic way, Frank.
Sure.
Just the GDP figure is not enough of happiness for me. It is how we are weeding out corruption, we are weeding out middlemen, and the economy that is growing, that money is reaching the people it is meant for.
Right. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Reality Check, and the larger picture being India Votes 2019. Thank you to my guests. We'll see you again next time.